Hello, hello. How's it going, everybody? Apparently, I moved stuff on my desk a little bit here. uh, Lovely computer issues. I think it'll be fine. But I started noticing that I was getting some EMI coming out of my graphics card, which picked up in the mic. So if I turn my mic a little bit and keep it over here, it seems to be fine. But I also have apparently moved my monitor in the process, and whatever, we'll make it work. Things are happening though, I guess. So last week, I guess the last 2 weeks, we were working with the Tory Docs, and specifically the website for Tory Docs, which uses Astro, and the plugin called Starlight, which is a plugin to um, like make a docs site on top of Astro. And uh, I think we kind of reached the end of at least the my direct involvement with that. We got the changes kind of pushed up, and I opened up a PR against Vitor's original PR, and I think we got that all merged in. So we're making a little bit of progress. Um, oh, this as I'm saying that, I'm scrolling through the PR. Yep. Okay, more things have happened. Yeah, so we got it merged in. So we've made some good progress there. I think I'm gonna let Vitor take the rest of that over, or take it to the end, and then I did enjoy doing like a Tory Docs Day though. So I'm thinking that we probably do that end of the month, every month at least for the foreseeable future, and that'll be I think more likely it'll end up being like writing docs or getting into like docs content rather than the site specifically. But we were kind of stuck on this site upgrade for a while, so it felt appropriate, especially since we just went through upgrades in the personal site, which was like 3 weeks ago now. But anyways, we got kind of all that stream of work done, and the next step from here is kind of disconnected in some ways. But we've been slowly looking towards and investigating on stream the idea of local first. And we've had a couple project days for the finance app, the open source finance app that I've been working on over time called Finatr. And we're going to do a little bit of planning, probably not too much code today, but we'll look at the setup and like what I've kind of been working towards upstream, where that's at, if it makes sense to continue pushing that in the context of Finatr, and like how can we move forward and check more of those like boxes of local first off. We've had some of them in place for quite some time. But and like some of the base functionality feels usable at the moment. But the I think that it's not truly a backend, but like the what is effectively the backend, I think could use a little bit more work, if only to get it to the point where something that's not like somebody that's not technical would feel comfortable using it. So that's kind of what we're gonna look at today. So it'll be like 2 or 3 phases or so where we look towards getting it to the point where somebody that's uh, like non-technical or not comfortable or doesn't know any of these terms that we're throwing around, get it to the point where they would be comfortable using it, and then we can start to work towards more of these like further checkboxes or further ideals. So I think that's where we're gonna get to today. Let me just turn off my phone here real quick. Um, Yeah. So a little bit of planning. A little bit of planning. Well, we've done a few project days for Finatr, and it's nice to break things up a little bit, but also um, I think in some ways like long term projects or seeing like what long term projects uh, and operating within those feels like is nice. Um, well, yeah, right. And like I've wanted to get um, more robust local first setup in this for a long time. I've been like pushing towards it, and it's a it's been in a place where I think technically it checked a couple boxes, um, and it had some of the functionality there, which made it usable. But there's like constantly been like little pieces or little rough edges that at least even just for me have prevented me from using it more frequently than I would expect to or want to use it. Um, so some of this is like scratching my own itch, but like that's also kind of the reason I started making it in the first place. So let's we'll pop on over here and oh, I guess I didn't say hey Nicola, good to see you. So yes, we got this PR is just about in, just about in. Um, the work that we're doing on stream here, we got that merged into their PR, and they've been doing some more work. We're getting close. Got a couple of reviews. Thanks for the reviews and the we're getting close. It'll be nice. Um, oh, interesting. Okay, so I think let's pop on over to. I'm not signed in on here. That's another thing. Let's. I suppose I'm not going to share it necessarily, but let's. I need to start writing some of these things down. Um, I want to. I think. Oh, I guess I did write it down. I need to figure out a way to like sign in, but hide some of this stuff. So like sign in private-ish mode. Because I want to be able to create issues. Like we can go to the repo. It's annoying because I can't search, which is an annoyance for sure. But wow, this is the other thing. I'm offset from my monitor now, and this is meaning that my keyboard is offset from what I normally have it. Okay. There we go. So we can go to it. We can see all the issues. We can view everything. We can't code search though, which is a little bit annoying, but also I can't like create issues or comment on stuff, which especially if we're doing like a Tory Docs day once a month, that would be helpful. Um, yep. So I think I guess let's give a like a kind of a high level. I wrote this down so I'd remember to do it. Like a high level overview or update on the state of Finatr and like what we have as far as local first goes. Um, so it is hosted, and I'm gonna go to the next dot. Actually, did we ever push? Okay, we did push the new update. All right. So we have like a next or like a beta branch, and then we have a like the main, and I mostly handle that through a single branch with like version triggering the deploy to production. But the part of the problem was that I would push changes up, they would be on the beta branch, I would use it, and then just never think to get those all pushed up to the production version. So if somebody was actually using it, they or in some ways it looked like it was just never getting touched because I was never actually pushing it to the real production version. So I was trying to get better about that. But we've got most of the stuff in here. If I go to examples, oh, yeah, actually, let's do this one. So we've got most of the bits here. I think this works. So this was sort of our first step as far as like making it local first. Download a JSON. I've had that in there for, I mean, that was probably like the first thing that I implemented. I was like, I don't want, I want this to be, or at least be able to be, purely client side, to where somebody could use it and never send the data off their computer if they so choose. And that choice made a lot more sense like 10 years ago when I was first working on this, because like the proliferation of devices wasn't quite as much as it is now. I mean, I've got on my desk right now, I've got technically 5 computers, I guess. Some of them wouldn't be like one is running an e-ink screen, so like I'm not gonna really count that, but still, I have my Mac and my Windows PC, and I have my phone. I legitimately bounce between all of these devices multiple times throughout the day, and being able to have that content in sync, even if it would be only through the local network, would be like super handy. What I was doing was taking this JSON file and dumping it into like a Google Drive or something like that, so I could pull it up in all those places. But like keeping those all in sync and remembering to do that was just enough of a friction point that I ended up just not using the site nearly as much as I would have hoped. So like in some ways this does check a box of like the tenets of local first. But we've got, as apart from that, and like at one point too, I had an import data from YNAB. I ended up taking that out just because it was getting a pain to maintain, but also we over time stopped using YNAB, so it wasn't as important, at least for me personally. So that ended up coming out over the past few years. But like we've got the accounts, transactions. We probably need to check back in and make sure that these that those values are right. Let me write that down. Okay, do it on the side here. Check on stats numbers. So I think those are probably still pretty decent. They just look a little funny with the default data that we have in here. Like these feel right. I don't know about the years. The years don't appear to be correct. And then the CSS is a little bit jank, but that's a whole separate issue. Taxes are like generally I leave taxes hidden because it was very much like an alpha thing, and I did use it. I haven't for a year or two because reasons, but eventually. I mean, the main things, especially if like this first big checkbox is getting somebody into it and comfortable with it, that isn't, or they don't consider themselves technical. Like they don't want to figure this stuff out. They just kind of like use the program and go with it. I think they're going to be wanting to enter accounts, transactions, and then probably seeing these 2 views, which at this point, they mostly are working fine. I think there's a couple edge cases where, like, depending on what frequency you choose, there's still little pieces that aren't quite working. Um, and I don't have any issues for it. I think I might have written down a to do or one or two to dos in my my notes. I thought there was still one case that I knew of that wasn't working with the frequency that I still needed to debug. But we might have actually fixed that on the last set of like Finatr project streams. I don't recall, but like functionally, we could probably put a little bit more like polish or elbow grease into the styles. Um, but I think we got the base pieces here. Like make this chart and this chart look a little bit nicer. And I mean, I think it's pretty close. And then it's just like so like with that, the I mean even the cash flow, I suspect the folks aren't going to be getting deep into the cash flow, but like even if you just do accounts, transactions, and then this planning page, or doing it through this planning page, even I think that is like polishing that process and getting that to a point where somebody non-technical can come in and like give it a go. I think that's like a good first phase or first step in. And then I think particularly the piece that we're missing is this like local. I mean, maybe not the local data, but like just the data in general. So I guess the next thing I would like to look at would be, I suppose we can like open up the code and we can look at the um, how are we saving data, and then I want to pull up the local first tenants. Tenants. Why is that? It still looks wrong. Uh, so that would be like the Incan switch article. I guess let's say this 7 local first tenants. And then we're gonna like start to map those two phases and like work, because like in general it is very difficult to actually check all of those boxes, and you're making in some ways trade-offs to meet some and then potentially excluding yourself from meeting others. So some of it is going to be, does it make sense to actually try to check all of those boxes? And then presuming if it does make sense, then we can start to lay out a plan to actually go forth and make sure to check all of those boxes, or at least define an architecture that will eventually get us there if the technology hasn't reached that point yet. So we'll go with that. Let's go look at how we're saving the data. I am still on a side branch here, and we want to get pull, I guess. Fortunately, with how I've moved things in my mic now, my mic is right in front of my terminal, so I'm kind of like looking over the top of my mic, but we will make it work. Yeah, writing down notes on the side here for me to remember to do to do. I don't. I just want warnings to go away. Okay. We're getting a Rust build in part because we have this. This does technically have a Tory app. I've mostly been focusing on the web version, but there are in being able to check off these boxes, there may be situations where like the web app will only ever be able to check off, say, 4 out of the 7. If you use the actual app, you might be able to get more like 6 out of 7 or something like that. So as we're going through it, there might be some situation where with two or three like implementations in part helped with Tori, we might be able to like in an overlap of all of those hit all 7 tenants, but it's potentially going to be difficult to hit all of them in one like encapsulated piece. But it does ship with a desktop app, which I probably could probably do more of that on stream. Let me write this down before I forget about it. Yeah, let's look at pull up old to-do list. Do we do that right away though? Probably not. We'll talk about the local first tenants, and then yeah, okay, yeah, let's do it. I've got a couple like old notes and stuff, and old to-do lists that I wrote down and checked a bunch of those things off, but didn't actually come back to it and check them off. So it was kind of neat pulling those up because some of them are a year or two old, I think, at this point or more. Why is this still? I don't want to see deprecated. I don't even know what that is. Okay. So most of what we're doing is there's sort of the two ways that we're handling data right now. One is a little bit. I mean, in some ways they're both kind of non-apparent. Would maybe be a good way to say it. If we go back to the site, import export, meh, this does give you the JSON. So like that's in some ways reasonably apparent, but there is like an endpoint. I don't have a link anywhere to this. So unless you happen to be watching the stream, you won't ever know to sign up, which is in some ways like intentional because this dumps into a database, and by having a central authority, you kind of aren't able to do all the 7 tenants. At least the way I have it set up. So it was I needed a solution for myself, if anything, or for the couple people that are just making use of it, and we were fine just dumping stuff in the database for a moment. You can see here we've got a Supabase connection, and so some of what I've been looking at upstream is working on this library called StarFX. StarFX is in some ways it's a spiritual successor to Redux Saga. You write functions, and you basically like set up sort of a pub sub thing, and in the front end you fire off these payloads when you do interactions, and those payloads then get processed by the it's not really a backend, but like this background process that's waiting for these payloads, and then it processes those and runs the actual functions, and then updates the store. So it's interesting because we have this like background-ish running process, which feels very much like the idea of it feels very much like sync engine capable. So I've kind of been like continuing to plant that seed and been working towards doing some of this. This to-do app that we have is actually also using StarFX, and we have now a in a branch like customized implementation to work using WebSockets to interact with OBS, which is the streaming software that I use. And I think some of the like that baseline, some of those pieces were I'm like working through what the API actually looks like and what would make sense and what would Eric was the person that started this, Eric Bauer. so kind of having that discussion with Eric, and you can see Vlad's got a um oh yeah, when I was starting StarFX stuff, he did a couple commits as I was trying to figure stuff out. But Vlad also uses StarFX, so there's a few of us that are sort of like working on it and pushing it forward as far as like a generic API goes. Um, but I think it has the potential to be in some ways a wrapper around some of these other libraries. So like one of the first things that I'm potentially looking at is doing a using this and having it kind of wrap YJS a little bit. Let YJS do its internal sync engine stuff, and then we just like subscribe to updates and use that as the storage mechanism, but then build our interactions on top of that. I think we're in a pretty good place. That's honestly kind of what I've done here with Supabase. When we do the create store, I do have a local storage persister, so we are actually persisting to like local storage. If you go in the applications menu in the DevTools, you'd see this dumped in there. That works fine. But as soon as you start adding multiple of these, you start running into like sync engine type considerations. So like if you have data in the local store, that works fine for when you are potentially disconnected from the internet even. Like you can use it and update it and it does all that. But like as soon as you connect to this database or like a reload and it connects to this, how do you like de-diff changes between those? As soon as you start talking that, like as soon as you expect your client to go offline and then be able to come back online and write updates back to this like central authority or other peers, you start getting into sync engine issues. So I've handled some of it, and it works fine, assuming you just avoid the known edge cases, which having myself written it, I can kind of do. And that's a part of the reason also that I haven't like pushed this database option forward too much, because I mean, we can listen to changes, but there's just not a great way right now to I can see the changes from Supabase. I can see the changes that I do, and I can see those through, but like getting subscribing to all those changes and then like syncing them all together into this like the main storage mechanism, or like what you consider the base or foundational store. I mean, you're basically writing a sync engine at that point. So I got the like trappings of it. Like we basically dealt with enough of the sync engine parts that we can make it work. So like I've got this auth piece. So we do when we start up, we call the get session, and then we also listen to state changes. So this right here handles the like when and if you auth, and that works pretty good. But and honestly, like this piece of code is kind of a like the it maps very well to like a resource. So StarFX is built on top of Effection. Effection is a little bit of a lower level library, JavaScript library that actually my employer has been working on for some time now. It's this is also part of the upstream work that I've been like looking at. We're trying to work through all the changes and updates to V4. So I have a couple projects on like V2, and I've updated one or two to V3, in part through StarFX, but we're working on V4. And it's mostly been about internal changes and the way, like the difference between V2 and V3 or V2 and V4 are not large. The API has changed a little bit, but the API is super small. The pieces that have changed are kind of trying to work around how TypeScript works with generators, which is part of what um, Effection is built on top of. The typing with generators is just not great in TypeScript. So we ended up switching things around. So by the time we hit like V3, V4, we were actually getting good TypeScript types, which was a huge issue. You could do all the TypeScript stuff, but then you're still having to like the inference was just not great. So I think we've dealt with that. And then there's some, uh, it wasn't like performance issues inherently with how we had it designed, but just more how the like the V8 engine handled or parsed or used these functions. So some of the paths just weren't as well optimized as other options that we've looked at and are utilizing in V4. So like V3 to V4 in specific edge cases, uh, it's like a huge difference as far as performance goes. So we've done a bunch of like little benchmarks to where it's on the level of like using raw generators and or some of the other observable-ish type libraries like RxJS. I think it's like at the point where it's like comparable to those as far as performance goes, which is great. So all that being said, there is within Effection a concept and an API called resources. A resource is a piece that you can encapsulate, and you fire it off, and then return or provide the return to the upper scope. So Effection is very much based around the idea of effects or functions or whatever you want to call them, operations happen within a scope. When you leave that scope, it's shut down and every like child of that operation is cleaned up, which works really nice. But also there's cases where you don't want it to shut down and you kind of need to deal with that in some way. And that's what a resource is for. So the idea of a resource is that I can encapsulate some work in an operation and then let that operation continue running in the upper scope. So as a parent, we can kick off a bunch of resources and then let them keep running in the parent scope effectively. That's kind of what this is basically doing. And actually, a lot of these are basically doing that. So this list of tasks are just like these resources or these things that are like continuously running in the backend. So we fire this thing off, and we're basically just like listening for changes in auth, and then we update our auth within our store. So the store within StarFX is actually using Immer.js. So there's still some like React Redux in here. And anytime you fire off a payload, it runs it through these middlewares. So this persist store middleware is just taking the whole state and storing it into the local storage. And then when you refresh the page, it hydrates. So it pulls that content and then dumps it into the state, into the like in memory state. That's basically what we're doing here. This was a custom one that we did, right? Where you have it below. Yep. Okay. So we'll minimize those. So I didn't end up doing the listening for the Supabase. I'm just like logging it out because I was starting to run into all those like sync engine type issues. Like, how do I determine, which one should go first? When should we pull one in versus not? And like for my own use case, to get the data in a place where I could make it easy to use, it wasn't worth solving this immediately, especially since we had some, or at least I had some ideas on how I could solve it more wholesale. Unfortunately, it's taken a little bit longer than I've had hoped to get that solved wholesale, but so we set up this like subscribe, and it's really not doing much other than just logging out um logging out when we get payloads. So like these payloads are both changes that we've made in this instance, but also like on any of my other computers too. But we don't have a great way to dedupe that. So like if I make a change, I then immediately see the change again here. I could like central authority it where I don't actually apply the payload until I get the response back. But honestly, that's starting to go away from like those 7 tenets. So, and that kind of comes back to, in some ways, I mean, this has been a long-term enough project that like I'm okay making sure that we hit those tenets that we care about. We want to, have it like offline, or we want to be able to keep state locally. It doesn't make sense to like push forward with an architecture that isn't going to meet those needs. And I might as well just do the work upstream if that's what we can do to unlock it. Is kind of where I've been at with it. But we basically push up all these functions, and these all get run in parallel here. So then what we're doing is we and this was one of the trade-offs that I made. I basically said, well, I'm only going to rehydrate from the local storage, which still kind of has potentially some issues, but like it's a known issue. so like the database works fine for like getting it into the initial state, but there's cases where like if I do a certain function or something like that, or anytime I reopen the app, I just immediately refresh it because I need that like updated state. So it rehydrates, and then this is basically like where the story ends up running and persisting in memory. So I did have this db rehydrate. Oh, okay. So when we first sign in, then it rehydrates from Supabase. So that's like the first. It's like a potential sync mechanism if you haven't updated the state, or local version isn't in a state where it's in sync with the database. The first time you sign in, it would do that, but then you're in some ways relying on that local storage after that, which is fine because I know that this is here, so I can just like sign out and reload and get the updated state. So like that's fine. But we ignored a bunch of errors because it wasn't worth dealing with mapping these function. I don't even remember what this is. Yeah, they've got some like custom type on here, and it wasn't worth trying to get them mapped into what call thinks is okay. Call is an affection function, which just is a generic way to call async functions or promises. Or I mean, in this case, it's pretty much anything really. In v4, it's a little bit this API surface has changed a little bit, but different consideration. So the persist DB, basically what we're doing is when we get a state update, we're going through that, figuring out what the update is, and then upserting the data. So this is what we don't actually make any direct calls to Supabase. We're writing everything locally, and then when that process is done, this gets triggered. So this persist call gets triggered, and it will, with any of those changes, then patch those up or upsert those to Supabase from here. So we don't have any direct interaction with Supabase. All of it happens through here, which is kind of neat, honestly. This is our integration with Supabase. Everything else is just like working with local store. So there's, I think, two big things that I've found with StarFX. It is, in some places, has a little bit more boilerplate, but it's useful boilerplate. It's patterns and structures to like simplify your views and your interactions to where you don't have any of that in the view, or makes it inconvenient to even put it in the view. So you have these very like defined functions, like I have an action that does this, and you call that action, and you have it well typed, and you pass in whatever values, and that's all the view sees. Or like in your code for the view, that's all you will see there, because all the other pieces to actually like save it up to the database or do the other functions are I don't want to say squirreled away, but like they're abstracted out into separate areas. So like here, we have an account add. We define a specific payload, and then this handles all the logic to like get it in place and put it into the actual store. And we can do some stuff like we have a bunch of cases where when you fill out a form or something like that, we need to convert. Ironically, this was probably one of the earlier applications that I started working in, like web apps that I started, like I wouldn't necessarily say like learning programming, but like in my process of learning web dev, this was one of the early projects I worked on, and it was sort of like a jump in the deep end because I'm dealing with money and dates, currency and dates, are rough. Even now, even with all these newer libraries and stuff, they're still kind of rough. And so some of that is like going in and out of a string. When you fill it out in a form, you need to like serialize that into something you can save, but then also something you can store and be able to show to the client. So there's a bunch of that logic, and I can tuck those away into specific functions to handle those cases, and it's all potentially in a place where I could throw it in a unit test. And I've done that in many cases. So we can do some rather complex math and some rather complex things and have it like here. I've got a bunch of specific tests for all of these reoccurrence type things. So a certain amount of money on a certain amount of frequency, we should be able to derive how often this shows up, basically. So like architecture wise, it's been working well, both what I had before, but also with StarFX. Like the idea of StarFX mapped really well to like where I was trying to push things. The problem was doing a lot of this like calculation stuff required the ability to make things asynchronous or do things in the background, which is in part why I pulled in StarFX, and it being built on top of Affection was a positive, because I knew I had the tools to be able to push some of that work off async. So we do we do that a couple ways. We do sort of this like background sync or background type work in here. So like after we fire it off and save it to the local state, this then fires off and saves it to the database. And I can make this even more async. We can fire that off, and if it fails, then we can show, like we can just spawn this off and let it run in the background. And then if it runs in an error, just show a pop-up or something like that. We've got the tools here to do that. I haven't, again, because we were looking at doing more and diving more into sync and stuff. But like right now, we're just logging error if we ended up hitting an issue. So we've got the tools to handle that, and we can do it asynchronously here or do this work in the background here. But then we also have the selectors, and that's been sort of the other piece. Is we have data that we want to save, but then we have data that we want to display, and those don't always line up. The like base level data that you want to save, we don't need to save what you end up drawing in the chart, because that can be derived. The problem is, and what I was running into previously over the years, was that like that derivation, especially if I was trying to keep everything client side, that derivation mapping out these transactions over the next year plus, like this was just something that with the code I was writing and the JavaScript I was writing, I was having trouble making it lazy enough to where devices 10 years ago could actually handle it. So I joked probably like, I mean, at this point, it's probably like 5 years back. I had come off a bit of a hiatus with working on this project, and it I was hitting performance issues, and it was very difficult, and I didn't see any other options either. Like from a technical perspective, they didn't exist, or I just wasn't there technically to understand that I could use this other option to resolve it. And in either way, it didn't seem like there was options. So I did what I could do, and I was just struggling with getting the performance well. And then I came back to it like 2 years later or something like that, after taking a bit of a hiatus, and it just kind of worked. It's just because devices got faster in those couple of years, which is honestly kind of hilarious. But we've refined it further. So like we can handle all of that in the background as needed, but then we can also handle it in the but background in as in like in the client, in like a background running process, or in a separate like section of the code I can run these processes. I mean, you still get the JavaScript single threaded kind of situation, but and potentially we could eventually do workers with this architecture. But there's sort of that like idea of data in the background, but then in the foreground, when you go to load and view the data, there's also like these derivations on top that you potentially want to do. Like I want to take data stored as a date, or data stored as like a string that looks like a date, and then convert it into something that the user can see in their browser. Because and that's when you start to get in all this like serialization kind of considerations, because I wanted to store the dates as a string without a time zone, because with what we're doing, the time zone isn't really helpful. But when you put it into something that the user wants to view, you kind of want to put it into a real JavaScript date, because then you can use the built-in browser functions to be able to help with making that localized. So there's like this extra amount of derivation on top when you go back to view it. So this idea of selectors, we've got a bunch of these. Chart data is probably the biggest one, where we're deriving a bunch of data to show in a chart. So you might have a single piece of data and have 4, 5, 6 different charts. Each of those charts might need the data in a different format. It doesn't really. It felt awkward to like derive that state. If I make an update, like calculate that state for all of these different charts and save that to the database, because then I was having to like flush those pieces out every time, and then just the incremental process there was not easy to work with. So what selectors are doing, this is actually out of reselect.js, which was built to actually to work with Redux, and it has effectively like built-in memoization. So the idea here is that I can write a selector. I can then compose selectors. So this chartable data is itself a selector. And each one of these are then memoized. So I can like build up the chart data. So if I change something that affects all of these things, it basically like will end up recalculating them all as needed when you go to render it. But it doesn't do that every time, only if the data has changed, which is like super handy for what we're doing. So there's still some work to be done. It isn't quite as like sync engine-esque as I would like at this point. But so like one of the options could potentially be just straight up swap to YJS or swap to one of these other options. I haven't though, because the combination of handling these side effects, doing this background work, but then also having this memoized like derived data when you go to view it, it's there it feels like there's so much value there that I don't want to move away from that. So that's in part why I've felt good about this architecture and have basically just been working upstream to see if we can get it in a good place where I could basically just like slot in. I got the hiccups apparently. Where I could basically just like slot in, instead of using an Image.js store, I could just slot in something that has a built-in sync engine. So that's kind of where we've been at. So I think it's going to continue to make sense to sort of like push on that idea. All right, I've been doing a lot of talking. We're going to check this one off. How are we saving data? I think we're at that point where we've gone through that enough. We want to pull up the local first tenants, but until then, I am going to grab a drink real quick because I forgot to grab one. We're doing a lot of talking today. So give me 1 sec. Let's see if my be right back buttons work. right. Drink. Okay, so high level, we have a let me bump bump timestamp. So we have a high level like overview of what we got going on here. Do I? Oh, I got a thing stuck in the corner there. It's fine. Um, here. Let's drop another set. Boop. Drop. Knock it out. Knock it out of the corner there. Oh, I reset the chat there. That's kind of annoying. I'll have to put that on the to-do list. Oh, and I still need to fix the 3D thing, don't I? I never came back to that. 3D command and resetting chat. So honestly, I'll probably end up pulling in the star effects in this chat overlay because I think it honestly would work pretty well as far as things go. But high level overview. We have like background processes in in-memory data store and a way to memoize derived data. That mostly comes in through a combination of star effects built on top of affection. So that's where we're at with like the current state, and what we're potentially looking at is doing some sort of like more sync engine-y type thing to where I mean it doesn't have to be necessarily built on top of Immer.js, but if we can like swap out stores or have different stores for different configurations or use cases like built into star effects, I think that would be really helpful. And that's part of like what does that look like is what I've been looking or working towards as far as upstream work goes. And I mean, at this point, there's a whole bunch of like sync engine options. So if this can be generically a thing that, like a lot of the examples I've seen in the area of local first are basically just a view, like it's a fancy GUI over the top of a database. You're grabbing the data and you're rendering it. Which is going to be perfectly fine for many applications. I'm sure it's basically just like a prettier version of Excel, if we're being like brutally honest. I mean, honestly, in reality, the vast majority of SaaS apps out there are probably competing with Excel. So especially in this app, like that need to have the derived data I think is incredibly valuable. But like just that as a pattern, I think is valuable for star effects to where if it can work with like generic Rust endpoints or GraphQL or whatever, you can have like little plugins or thunks you define or set up specifically for those tasks. But then also if you can make use of this, like the idea of this background process or this like sync or this mechanism that can run a resource in the background, we can have that sync engine doing its thing and then just like updating the state as we need to, which is would be really cool as far as a way or a place that star effects could go. I mean, no expectations. It's not it's my sole decision, but I think there's potentially the interest for it. So I think this is actually a good place now to go take a look at the local first tenants. Yeah. So I mean, you can see that I've been here a few times. I guess they did some redirects. But this these ideas have been something that I've been thinking about for some time. I mean, we've gone through it on stream a few times. If you're interested in local first, check back in the VODs or whatever you call them on YouTube. The previous streams that we've done a bunch on local first, um, including testing a bunch of these libraries and auto merge being one of them. Ink and Switch has been working on. It's a little bit more of a research type library, um, but it's been one of the foremost iterations on this idea, and this company slash developer group has been also pushing it forward highly. Uh, so like in generically, I've had these things in the back of my mind, but I feel like they sort of like put words to what I was like looking for. And they've got a good here. I guess this is these are sort of like the tenants. So when I say the 7 tenants, it's basically like this. So if we would like write these down, which should we? We should actually. Let me just I guess I'll just do these in VS Code here. Um, let's go ahead and I'm gonna copy these and we'll read them through them in VS Code and then like fill out related answers. Let's do here. Markdown. Format document. Let's do this, I guess. Oh. So, fast. Whoop. I hit save because, habit. So fast. Aggressive caching and downloading resources ahead of time can be a way to prevent the user from seeing spinners when they open your app or when they previously had it open. I mean, honestly, we have so much of this stuff in memory and we're doing a lot of the work in the background or memoized when we derive data. Um, I would honestly say that we're like just straight up checkbox this. This has been a thing that as we've been, where's my, this one here? As we've been like moving on this idea, this has been a thing that has kind of always been in place. What is with the, no, what? Did I have a tab in there or what? That was weird. All right. Sure, let's do this. I guess I can do this and this. There we go. Multi-device syncing infrastructure like Firebase and iCloud make multi-device support relatively painless, although they do introduce longevity and privacy concerns. So this is potentially a more complex piece. So self-hosted infrastructure is one way to deal with it, but then you potentially have the trade-off. We'll come back to that because that I think also overlaps a little bit with some of these other pieces. In a way where we might want to write our like to-dos in a different way. So offline in the web world, progressive web apps offer features. I mean, this is sort of like this became a big thing, and then it kind of got killed off again, in part because corporate interests. I feel like they offer features like service workers and app manifests that can help in the mobile world be aware of WebKit frames and other network dependent components. Test your apps by turning off your Wi-Fi or using traffic shapers such as the Chrome DevTools Network Condition Simulator or the iOS Network Link Conditioner. So the like generically is just make sure it can go offline and not die. Because there's definitely some apps that are like, I don't know that they're specifically intended or built that way, but they just are built in a way where you always have the internet available, and the thought just wasn't put into checking to make sure that it didn't explode if you didn't have internet connection. Um, and like just it's not just having a poor internet connection, like you're in some parts of like rural America or in other countries, like the internet is not great and potentially will drop out. um it's definitely come a long way there. The internet in the area that I live in is pretty reliable. um I mean, you get into parts of America or in Europe or whatnot, and you can get like fiber to the home, so you're getting like 1, 5, 10 gigabit download. Um, and even the upload is pretty good too. It's like some of those are symmetrical, where your upload and your download speeds are the same, which is amazing. But if you go on a plane flight or you go, up into the woods or whatever, uh, obviously it's going to be dependent on your app. A finance app probably is going to benefit less from like being built with the expectation that somebody's going up north into the woods and they're not going to have any connection. Um, but I could potentially see somebody looking at this while they're on a train or on a plane or something like that. They're on a subway and the connection is just not great. Um, but that also kind of starts to come into some of these other pieces too, which we'll get to at that point. So like I feel like there's a lot of overlap in these. It's in some ways the same generic checkbox, but it's hard to check all of them because it like makes you, if having central authority is sort of the easy answer, and that checks a lot of these boxes or can potentially check a lot of these boxes, but then it makes it very hard to have some of the other ones just checked, like privacy. If you're saving your state into a cloud thing, a cloud provider is having that or holding that state for you, there's potentially privacy issues there. If you don't encrypt it or you do it in a way where, if you get hacked, if that database gets hacked, you can potentially, as a user, my information could be just dropped on the web somewhere if that happens. So like, it's kind of like that's kind of ends up being the big trade-off is like, if I want to be able to go offline, that's sort of inherently tied to, like it's just it's less like being able to go offline and more like I want to expect my data be saved and handled safely and locally first, to where I can use this if in any condition that my network is in, either local network or greater network. But then like apart from that, like that sort of is inherently tied to the privacy piece, because if I have control over, and this also ties into this a little bit, if I have control over my data and I can make sure to set it up or use it in a way where it is only ever on my local network, I can technically be like online as far as my local network goes, but then be in control of the data and my privacy related to that. And if you can run the whole thing offline and it requires no services, it sort of comes along with the idea of longevity. Because if I'm not dependent on something existing, as long as I have or am able to run the thing on my own network or on my own devices, irrespective of like other outside choices, external choices, that provides some, uh, highly code with high longevity. That's maybe a good way to say that. So like here, make sure your software can easily export to flattened standard formats like JSON or PDF. So like that's been a thing that we've had for a while. I think I can safely check this off. I mean, there's a little bit of a caveat because like there's also the idea of schemas. So if you never update the app, um, and then you come back online or something a year later and you update the app, we need to be able to deal with schema changes potentially. So there is some idea of like if you have a backed up piece or a backed up data, and you go to sync and it fails, how do you recover from that? If it is saved in a thing like JSON, that is more recoverable, but then you potentially have like privacy issues. If it's just like unencrypted data that you have stored locally, that anything could read, if it has access to the file system, that starts to potentially become a privacy issue. So this is where it's like the trade-offs I don't think are entirely obvious until you like really start to dig into them and see how you can actually implement these. Hey Chris, good to see you. So if we go and say we've checked off longevity because we support JSON and we don't actually push it up to like a cloud app or something like this, it mostly checks the privacy issue. But like it would be kind of nice to also encrypt the data at rest. But then if you encrypt it, how do you handle this case of like now you need to allow the user to be able to, user control? Can they duplicate and back it up? Maybe, but if they don't have the encryption key to be able to unencrypt it, that's useless. So like these are all kind of tied together here to where it becomes really difficult to check all three boxes at the same time. If you encrypt it and you don't send it off the computer, the user then needs to control those encryption keys. So honestly, like I've gone with the idea of longevity. The data that folks are writing in here is inherently private, but like if it gets out, I don't think it's incredibly detrimental. And I've gone with the idea of that the longevity and the user control is more important than this potential situation of that somebody gets into the system, has file system access, and is able to get into that data. But being able to decrypt it at some point would be nice, and that's I think potentially going to be a long term thing. So like if we say, okay, yes, we've checked off user control. If we do the sync engine stuff, we can still potentially have and keep that box checked. Because if we have a sync engine, the idea of a sync engine is just to get the data in a, rather than doing like fetch calls, we're just getting the data sort of like in the background ish. And we could still have the ability to, or either on demand or automatically persist it to some sort of local storage mechanism or like JSON file or something like that. So you can have like the idea of a backup somewhere somehow. So I would say we kind of have that checked. I don't want to say that we don't have privacy checked, but it's sort of like I don't know. This isn't really valid markdown, but like it's kind of checked ish. It's probably as private as we can get it right now because it doesn't inherently require a cloud connection. So the piece, so like just generically what we have so far, we kind of have 4 of them checked. And it's these last pieces that I've really been pushing on. I mean, and honestly, we could probably say offline is checked too, technically. I mean, you can use it offline; it'll work. But then it kind of comes back to this like if you're only using it offline and you only have it on the one device, yes, we've technically checked the box. So like this doesn't really get caveats until you start talking about multi-device. So I think we can like toss those caveats into the multi-device and the collaboration. And those are kind of inherently tied together because if you think about it, um, if you do the work to get it to work across devices, so supporting multi-device means I can use it on my Windows box, on my Mac laptop, and on my phone. Each one of those is like a peer. So you can think of those as each one of those is effectively like a user. It's just those three users are all under my own control. If you expand on that a little bit, I could reasonably have it open on my phone, make a change, turn off my phone, sit down, and want to see the change on my computer. We've effectively, if we've implemented multi-device, we're like so close to collaboration. The only difference is that like being able to share budgets or share plans with each other. So there's that like teamwork little off bit that would be remaining, and that also then starts to kind of tie back into privacy because you need to do that in a way where you can share it, but share it in a way that the user has control over. So see how these are all sort of like if you make a decision, you've now potentially made it more difficult to do some of the other ones. So we've kind of checked off these because these were highly beneficial and they were ones that I could technically do at that time. But these last couple bits, getting those while not unchecking the other options is it's a much longer term process here. It's like that one XKCD comic. The like program manager or whatever requests you to like take a picture of a bird, and they're like, yeah, that'll take like a week, and then they say, well, can you then identify what kind of bird that is? And they're like, yeah, give me a research team in 6 years. uh it's something like that. Like that's the idea, is like checking this first few boxes, yeah, I could do that with very little programming knowledge. We basically had that in Finatr for 10 years now. These last little bits though, and the space has come a long way. So folks working on YJS, for folks working on AutoMerge, that has taken a lot. That has taken the space much further. Um, so these last little bits, the collaboration and the multi-device, I think are going to be the painful bits. Honestly, like to check all of those off, I I guess if we check those two things off, we've pretty much checked all of these off. I mean, the privacy one is potentially gonna like the encrypting the data at rest, and encrypting the data at rest in a way which ties into collaboration is probably going to be the most difficult bit. I think we're pretty close to the multi-device support, in part because if if we can get like the sync engine idea working in StarFX, potentially like swapping out for the internal store piece for like YJS or something like that, I think I can get the multi-device and potentially some like low-level collaboration working. And that's like potentially something that could happen this year. But that collaboration with privacy is potentially going to be the longest road. And I guess to where are we at in our to-do list? Um, let's cross that off. We're gonna take a quick side. Is that right? We're gonna take a quick aside into, I believe it's called Beehive. Let's see if I got that name right. And we'll see if I can actually pull this up. So they've also been working on Keyhive. Um, yes, they've got some other interesting bits here too. Um, Keyhive is something Brooklyn. I think they've mostly been pushing it forward here. They were involved with I'm gonna forget the name of it. Um, they search on YouTube for their name. They've or go on their socials or whatever. But Brooklyn, if you're interested in this deeper dive, Brooklyn's done a couple of interviews, and their ideas and like their background on what they did previously that sort of has led into this is super interesting. And it in some ways it deals with that like file system encryption. How do we put this in a place where you don't accidentally leak that to other people type considerations? So like if you can solve it at the server level, doing it on a local computer is, you can kind of do it in a very similar fashion. So the idea of Keyhive is, I mean, this is big, and I don't think I've read through this whole thing, or at least not in this state. They've been, I think, slowly updating this over time. Um, I was hoping to get like a high level your conclusion. So there's like these different ideas of like sync pieces, but then also you need to ensure that you like share the encryption keys too. So if you're encrypting this thing at rest, privacy. If you want to transfer that to somebody else, you need to then basically like grant them the encryption key. So you want to have a way where you keep your own version of the encryption key, and then they like have their own version of it. Um, and then you deal with all the history stuff too. So this probably represents it the best. You're effectively moving the auth from a central authority into like the local first, and you're doing that all through encrypted at rest, and this idea of like passing around the keys. Um, that's probably going to be the best. Group key agreement. So like this is the idea of, and continuous group keys. So if you add somebody else to it, every time you add a new team member, you all need to like agree on a key or a derivation of, or have like a shared parent key or something like that. There's some like agreement that needs to happen. Um, and like you potentially need to continuously do that. So give this a read. They've got a whole bunch of work on this, and there's a um, I think they've got a I think they've got a GitHub link here too somewhere, but I'm not finding it. Either way, I don't think. Hold that thought. The other thing that has been out there is this thing called Jazz. One of the things they've really been pushing on was pass keys and like authentication. So they sort of like one of the first things they looked to solve or deal with was the authentication piece, which meant that they were sort of like leading the charge in this, like this similar work to what Brooklyn is doing. It seems like it's solved slightly differently, but meeting sort of the same or similar goals, they jumped immediately into the authentication part, and they've got a lot of work done on that. Um, you end up having to use that, like if you want the authentication from this, you then are sort of like required to use their idea of co-values, which are, they're like synced or shared data mechanism. Um, and they do offer some cloud services. So like they are funding this project basically through, um, I don't think they're entirely bootstrapped. Don't quote me on that. I don't think they're entirely bootstrapped, but like the they've got a free tier and the cloud service, and that's sort of like how they're pushing this forward. Uh, I think you can self-host this stuff, but then you're starting to move more away from the idea of offline and user control. So what Brooklyn is doing with what was it, Keyhive? What Brooklyn's doing with Keyhive, I think, gets us closer to direct user control plus offline plus collaboration, and and kind of inherently with that the multi-device. Um, but it's much more like at the research stage. I think I don't know that it's at a point where we could actually pull it in and use it, but it's potentially in a place where we could maybe in the future go down that. If StarFX could generically use any of these like internal bits, we could potentially look at supporting Jazz, but that is going to push us kind of away from some of these other boxes that we already have checked. But it might be worth that trade-off, because like the user control, that mechanism that we have right now, a button to save it to JSON, is not you got to remember to do that. So I don't want to lose the mechanism, and I think we could potentially keep it around. But if we want to improve that situation, like have some sort of like automatic backup or something like that, I think pulling in Jazz tools is going to move us further away from that idea. So it's, I think supporting the idea of multi-device and collaboration potentially through either I don't want to like run a custom sync engine, honestly. It would be nice to just pull something into and use the ideas in StarFX as sort of a wrapper of that. But potentially, if we could wrap Jazz, that might get us part of the way there. And this, I don't think, is inherently an either or decision. If StarFX ends up being a generic wrapper, we can potentially have a like separation of code path kind of thing, where if a user wants to use a certain set of features and have a certain amount of control, they can opt into relying purely on like JSON files, or they could opt into and sign in and use maybe something built on top of Jazz tools, or like right now we have the thing built on top of Supabase. It's there's less user control there. Well, I mean, you can still save it as JSON, so it's more, I guess privacy would probably be it's saved in a database, so in theory it's potentially less private. But that might be worth a trade-off, and those trade-offs may be, if we can't make it easy to check all of these at the current time, defining those trade-offs and allowing users to opt into one that they value the most, I think is going to be our best option. So I think that's probably where we're at with that. We're gonna keep checking in on Beehive and seeing and like following the work that in general Link and Switch is doing in this space. But honestly, I think we're at the point where if we could support either Jazz Tools and or YJS, that might check enough of the boxes that we can actually like move forward with. You know, if we can check most of the boxes and support that for a few years, eventually maybe Beehive gets to the point where we could pull in and use that as an idea or directly if it becomes a library, um, or more than it is right now. I think there is code. I think they have code, like working code, but I just don't know the state of it offhand. If we can kind of like buy time a little bit until more of this research and this stuff is worked out, that might be your best step here. So I think that's where we're going to go with it. If we want to we're going to kind of bleed into the next. Come on over. Why aren't you moving? Weird. It doesn't let me move or click here. Now we're going to bleed into this next piece here. Old to-do list. But here I'm gonna write these down. This is basically going to be like our new to-do list. So we want to see if we can support Jazz tools. I think the Jazz tools would be nice in the web app potentially, especially if you want to share it. See if we can also support YJS. I like YJS, and also potentially, if not YJS, the oh no, what's the other library? Local first, Laurel. Yes, thank you, Laurel. I don't know that I've got a hard like a, I'm not specifically leaning one way versus the other, YGS or Laurel. I like what they're doing with Laurel, and it would be nice to support that. The ecosystem of YJS is definitely more, it just had more time to develop, which is attractive. But I think in either case, the value add would be being able to local peer-to-peer sync. And these might be sort of like two inherently separate features. And this is where I could see folks potentially opting into one versus the other. Local peer-to-peer sync would probably be most convenient to do through a Tori app. If we have a Tori app run like a local service that devices on the network could use to sync, I mean, there's security considerations there. You're opening up connections effectively, but you're not like a central authority. You're just providing the ability for clients to find each other. So there would be, if we're going to enable that, we would need some potentially ideas in the like team collaboration space, and potentially the encryption parts of it. The multi-device sort of then comes along for the ride with that. Like if I want to allow my two devices to talk to each other, you might not need quite as much there, especially if you're on like a very, very local network, but you don't want to accidentally like take your laptop to a coffee shop and then be running a server. So there's things to consider there. But I think if we wanted to support that feature, YJS or Laurel might be the give us or push us the furthest along that path. I think it's I like the idea of Jazz tools, if only because if we're looking at as a first phase, supporting folks that aren't highly technical to be able to use this, it feels like Jazz Tools is potentially going to be our best bet, because we could do some of the encryption stuff. We can do everything except for like the user control bit, but like that wouldn't inherently be something that they would highly value. So it could be worth that trade-off. I think the local peer-to-peer sync is something we're going to continue to explore, because if only that's neat. We've done some of that already on stream. Like last fall, we were playing around with that. So if only to play around with it more on stream, that would be fun to do. But I think we could potentially have it as one of the options that we could support long term. Basically, being able to run all this stuff locally on your own network. It would be nice to sort of marry these two together to where we don't have to have two completely separate sync engines or tools to be able to do that. But that's for future us to figure out if that's even possible. So I think what we'll put it out here, see if we can support Jazz Tools. Perhaps, whoops. Oh my goodness. Per R. No, not T, R. There we go. Per. Holy cow. Okay. We got this. We got this. We got this. There we go. Perhaps it was apparently the hardest word ever. Perhaps most valued by folks who are less highly technical. And I mean, or want to use it that way. I don't want to just make a bucket of like people that know programming, people that don't know programming, because there's like levels of obstacle to consider here too. I know programming things. I can set things up. I could run a home server. I don't always want to do that for every app that I want to use. There's some things that I am perfectly comfortable paying for because it's worth my time to pay them a handful of dollars to handle. I use Obsidian. I pay for their sync service. I could potentially do some of this stuff myself, use Google Drive or something like that. I'm already paying for that too. But like, it works. It does what I need it to do, and I don't have to think about it. So like, it's not just folks who are less highly technical, but just I don't want to deal with it for this case. You know, when you're making an app, you should not use every new library, have everything being on the bleeding edge, because you're going to get cut a lot. Pick the feature that's going to be most beneficial to ship. Potentially have some beta alpha level code to really push that forward and make that feature stand out. But if you do experimental stuff in every aspect of your app, you're never going to get to the point where you ship. So I think these are probably the top options here. Is see if we can support some sort of sync engine within the context of StarFX. I'm not inherently sold into one versus the other, but honestly, I'm at the point where I would potentially look into Jazz Tools first, if only because of this. And we've also looked at both YJS and Laurel on stream in the past. We haven't actually gotten around to Jazz Tools yet. So that might be a first thing. We might play around with Jazz Tools on stream. See how that feels, see if that is even reasonable as a first checkbox. But in either case, I think there's a situation where we want to, in some ways, support both, which feels awkward to have two separate sync engines. But if we have the abstraction there to support that, it might not be as big of a deal. So, that's probably, I think that's probably what we're going to do. So then I guess the other piece is we have this idea of middlewares with persisters. I don't know if that's spelled right, but persisters, whatever. Save. I don't think it's sort of a made up word, I think. So yep. um, so the idea is like save backups as state changes. Now there is some level of like you want the accepted state to be the thing that you save. So if you have if you have multi-device, if you have 3 devices all saving backups, if they're saving backups locally, that might be fine. But if they're all saving backups to say like an S3 or network attached storage or something like that, now you're basically doing another sync engine. So in some ways, supporting the like peer-to-peer local sync actually handles a bunch of these cases where if I want to save backups, again, user control, those then just become new peers. They can listen to those changes, update as needed. And that's part of what's pushing me towards this direction. But honestly, like if I can, for my own personal use case, if I can get the thing working to where I don't have to think about the state or the data and it just sort of works between my devices, honestly doing this, especially if I want to like use this with my spouse, she's seen it, but she never touches it because it's basically just on my devices. And I would like to be able to move past that. So these are sort of like 2 competing parallel tracks, I think. Depending in part, I guess the first checkbox here is sync engine support generically in star effects. And we've got like the idea of managing resources. We're talking through that. I've got some examples. We've got some code. Potential PRs open for some of that. I think from there, if that idea lands as it is now, we could potentially use that same idea to support any type of like sync or well, any type of like storage mechanism. We might need to move stuff around a little bit and whatnot to do that, but I there's a good possibility. So if we can check this off, these then sort of become parallel pieces to that. So I guess I'll just sort of nest it into there. This we can do separately. And I think so right now we're persisting it to it persists to local storage. We can check that off right away. It persists to we'll say FS. That's going to be a lot harder in the web app, but potentially that's something we could do right now in the Tori app. So that could be maybe a Tori app only for now. And I say that because we already are doing that effectively here. These, when I check these boxes, this syncs, it's using SerifX. We have a custom middleware that then uses the Tori file system plugin to then save that state to to the file system. So every change we make here, it's getting saved to the file system. And that's fine for these to-do items. Whoop, here, where are we going? Here, this. That's fine for these. I'm literally doing this live. You're looking at it now. Privacy is much less of a, I'm not gonna say it's not a concern, but like it's inherently public. So me saving this in plain text to the file system, not a problem. So I think we could potentially do that. But again, I'm mostly focusing on the web app at this point because, um, you know, mostly this. I think it's gonna be a little bit easier to get folks to try it out if it's in website form. If they have to download an app first, there's a little bit of an obstacle there. I mean, that used to be like the thing. Everything became an app, but then I get the feeling that there's this like attrition going on that nobody wants. At least me personally, I try not to download any apps if I don't have to. um, so I think that's kind of where we're at. Is we potentially have this track. I don't know. Like, is there another option between these two? I think I'm probably fine with this for right now. I think we keep pushing on this idea here. We're getting really close, so it'll be probably the idea of like, um, let's push on this upstream. Let's push on just generically checking off to-do items, dealing with edge cases, and making things look a little bit nicer. So I think in future project days, we're getting close to the end here of the stream. I think generically if we do more stuff on the stream, we'll end up basically bucketing into these two. It'll either be like pursuing one of these or doing base level stuff to support one of those, or it'll be making things look nicer. So we're working through the design a little bit more. I'm definitely much more of a I wouldn't describe myself as like a back end engineer, but like I appreciate something being well designed, and I can recognize something that is well designed. But taking something from what it is to well designed is less of my skill set than like solving hard, like technical type challenges. So like this sick engine stuff, this definitely tickles my interests. uh, Doing redesigns and like updating the design stuff, a little bit less so. So if you're interested in helping out with an open source finance app, I have a link in the description. Would love design help. Would love that. But honestly, anybody using it, happy to discuss tweaking or dealing with edge cases or features. Hop in the Discord or hit up the link and we can discuss an issue. I guess to close it out, we are going to here. Let's build up to-do list. That's not what I tried to type, but we'll go with it. We'll close it out with this. This is my old to-do list. I think I first made this coming on 2 years ago now. That's done. I mean, honestly, I'm still good with Tailwind. Technically, I think this might be done in part because we're still in Parcel.js, which is using Lightning CS. I'm okay with RS. I don't think we need to actually switch to RS back. Not a big deal. There's still some things in Parcel.js that I'm not a huge fan of. If we would change at this point, it might be to Vite, but I don't think there's any benefit in really doing that. So this project is probably going to stay. I'm pretty sure it's still in Parcel. Oh, this. Parcel cache. Yes, it's still in Parcel. I think I'm fine with that. We do actually have Genero.js in place. We actually did all this. Everything is switched to React Aria now. I mean, we've been doing planning and mind mapping stuff. So like, I mean, the onboarding bit, I could probably use some more effort there. If you're interested in getting involved, again, check out the links. Happy to chat. I could do better with that though. This is probably the last bit here that I want to lift up. I guess I just do this. We'll put it in as a completely separate option. So this is likely going to be a future level implementation. The idea here is that we could, based off of a list of transactions, reasonably predict the next few weeks, next few months. The longer the time span gets out, the more potential variability comes into play. Being able to represent that in a graphical form, I think would be really useful. So, like when you're talking retirement could be 10, 20, 30 years out. So, like the calculations inherently become, I mean, effectively they're the same, but the variables become so, like the mins and maxes of those variables become so large. Like that deviation between those is so large that the math like inherently changes. So there's like in we've got the planning graph and then we've got the cash flow analysis. I think the cash flow analysis I have going out a year right now. When you start getting outside of that, you start getting into the time span where how you think about the math is different. It's still the same math, but there's just so many variables involved that it fundamentally affects how you plan and think about it. So we could take that data that we have with those transactions and then basically make a graph representing those potential variables. So if somebody says, well, this can, my paycheck might go from, 5,000 a month up to 10,000 a month. How do you plan with that? So being able to basically say, if you have a whole bunch of good months all right in a row, this is where you'd be at. If you don't, this is where you'd be at. So both using that information and doing it in a way where you can apply that in the recent future, but then also like if you're talking 20, 30 years out for retirement, having that information available to you would also be helpful. But that's also in some ways like what retirement planning ends up being basically. If we can just generically say, on average, these numbers are this, these are this, you got to have probably about this. That's going to be a good enough number to like plan for or plan off of for the next 20 years. And then you just readjust every 6 months or whatever. So I think that would potentially be the next big feature. But we got a bunch of polish, and I think knocking out these first is going to be first on this to-do list. And I think that's where we're going to call it, though. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. I got a meeting to run to. I don't know what we'll do next week. Maybe another project day. We'll see. But have a great rest of your week. I'll put a schedule up here. I keep saying that I'm going to do it soon, and then life gets in the way. But I'll get a thing scheduled, and for next week Tuesday. We'll see you then. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Bye.